and the right of families to function independently of government control. That's the big umbrella issue, that it changes with regard to the issue.
Right.
But the big issue is, how do we protect the parents, the families, and the children, and the religious freedom here in the state of Indiana?
Hi, I'm Micah Clark. Thank you for joining us today. With us today, I have a guest that many of you will know. Eric Miller is the founder of Advance America. What you may not know is that when I graduated from college, I did an internship at the State House. I worked for a state senator for his campaign briefly. And then I went to work for Advance America, which was then Citizens Concern for the Constitution, which was and is the state's largest pro-family organization. And so many of you know Eric Miller. He's been around for many, many years. We're going to talk to him today about Advance America, its founding, and some of the battles that he fought over the years. So Eric, great to have you on.
Mike, it's good to be with you, and thank you for letting people know that both you and I were involved with the government when we were both much younger than what we are now, my friend.
Well, and Advance America, which was formerly CCC,
Right.
When did you start? And tell us why you started the organization. Maybe a little bit about yourself before then,
Sure.
how the Lord led you to start the organization.
It's really interesting because, again, I think people say, how do you get involved with the political arena, with the government arena, with all these issues? Well, I got saved in 1978. I was halfway through law school, and the Lord laid on my heart some of these battles that were going on in other parts of the country, Texas with Lester Roloff and other things. And I thought, how do we prevent those things from happening here in the state of Indiana? So in 1979, I started meeting with some pastors and talking about things that we can do to be proactive here, that would be better to change laws rather than to litigate in a courtroom. Also, it's better from a time standpoint and a dollar standpoint. So then in November of 1980, as a matter of fact, November 22nd, 1980, I got together with a handful of people and said, why don't we start an organization, and I'll be their eyes and ears down at the State House, let them know what's going on, because I believe then, as I do now, that people are hungry for knowledge. That's what you do a great job of, and you've done that for many, many years with the American Family Association, and before with me, and then with IFI as well. You and I have the same philosophy, that there's a whole lot of people that care about issues involving their family, their church, their freedoms, their future, but they just don't know what's going on. And so what we decided to do was to set up an organization, then Citizens Concern for the Constitution. I would practice law part-time, and I would let people know about legislation at the State House, so that if they knew what was going on, they could then contact their elected official. And that was the philosophy that began Citizens Concern for the Constitution, and the philosophy that continues to this day, that if you give people the truth, and you give them the tools to know how to contact their elected official, how to find out who represents them, because it's still true, Micah, as you know, 10 to 15 phone calls or emails on an issue to a legislator, a state rep or a state senator, is an avalanche on most issues.
Well, Eric, I've told my wife before and other people jokingly, but it's actually kind of true. I had a political science degree in college, and there was only about 2 weeks of it that I ever used in my life, and that was how a bill becomes a law. And you know the process, I think, better than anybody. But how did you learn that? I'll tell you how I learned it. It's kind of humorous. When I worked for the state Senate campaign, they had a coloring book the legislators used to give it. Do you remember that?
Right.
How a bill becomes a law? And then we had something back then called a chamber book. I mean, this is pre-internet days. But did you just jump right in, or how did you learn the process so well?
I think, again, if people look at this and say, okay, as they ask the Lord what it is they want them to do about the three institutions that God created, the home, church, and government. Well, God has a way of preparing us ahead of time for the role that he has for us, just like you were able to learn things about the State House before you ever came over to work with us at CCC. Well, in the late 1970s, I became the legislative liaison for the Bureau of Motor Vehicles for a man running for Lieutenant Governor, Ralph Venata, former mayor of Shelbyville. So what the Lord knew that I didn't know is, even before I became a Christian in 1978, the Lord was preparing me for the ministry of Citizens Concern for the Constitution. I was the legislative aide for one of the top governmental officials in the cabinet of Dr. Otis R. Bowen, the governor then. And so I was learning the process, learning elected officials, learning how a bill became a law. So then, when the Lord laid on my heart that we really need to change laws or keep good laws rather than to fight in a courtroom in terms of time and money, the Lord had used that time in state government to teach me all about state government and give me contacts in state government before I ever started CCC.
Do you remember some of the early battles from the 80s?
Oh my! Probably we began CCC with a focus on churches and Christian schools. There was not a concern about same-sex marriage.
Right.
There wasn't a concern about some other issues, but we knew that the battles that were going on around the country were the churches and the Christian schools. Doc Bowen signed a law into existence in 1980 about protecting daycares down in Seymour, Indiana, Brownstown, Indiana, Jackson County. And that was one of the first battles we had where you had the state of Indiana going after a church ministry. Up until that time, Micah, they were leaving Sunday schools, Bible schools, church camps, daycares. They were leaving those alone because everybody knew that that ministry of a church was doing wonderful things for people, and they're not charging anything to the government or getting anything from the government. Leave them alone. For centuries, they've done a great job. Leave them alone. But in 1979, some officials inside state government decided that they wanted to go after a church ministry. So a lot of pastors got involved, and we wound up winning with legislation signed by Doc Bowen. But then after that, it was like, what do we do? Because there's going to be future battles. There's going to be other things that are happening. And then Dick Thompson, the former state senator, our good friend, Jeff Thompson's dad, currently head of the Ways and Means Committee, he was instrumental in helping further protect churches after that. And so what we had was, again, a battle that was localized, that got state awareness, that we wound up passing a law. We won on that. So the early battles were about churches and their ministry. We had a battle over campgrounds, where they wanted to get information on students at camp, and you say, now, wait a minute. Children go to a church camp, and the church is running the church camp. The parents choose to send their children to a church camp. The government has no business knowing what's going on at that church camp. Now, of course, we agree with safety standards and fire, all that. But as far as getting confidential information on any child, that's none of their business. So we had that battle as well. And then the battles began with Christian schools because, again, I think public schools saw them as competition, not as a way of protecting children, but as competition. And then I think it was 1983 that there was a meeting at the World War Memorial with former Judge Ken Johnson, who since has passed away, and some other people about there's another avenue they wanted to look at called homeschooling. And so then we began working with homeschoolers back in the 1980s, early 1980s. And the battles that began with homeschooling, they wanted to divorce homeschooling from Christian schools. They wanted, because right now in the state of Indiana, you have public schools and you have non-public schools. Non-public schools include homeschools, Christian schools, private schools. And what some people in government wanted to do was divide and conquer. We'll put homeschools over here, Christian schools over here, private schools over here. And we fought that battle to say, no, any choice other than a public school is a non-public school. So we were able to keep homeschooling under the umbrella of non-public schools to protect them, Christian schools under the umbrella of non-public schools to protect them. So the early battles were really over churches and their ministries, and also protecting children and the right of parents to raise their children the way they want to.
Well, Indiana has been known for decades because of your work for one of the freest homeschool states in the nation, as a model of letting parents do what they want to do. You know, something we've run into in the State House, and you probably ran into it back then, you kind of touched on it with the camp issue. Does it concern you how often we see the idea that the government knows better than parents?
Absolutely.
The idea that a parent can't vet a Christian camp or vet a daycare on their own, they need government help to find out what a good daycare is kind of ridiculous.
It is. It's ridiculous, and it's dangerous because what they're doing, they're saying basically that the children really belong to the state.
Right.
And therefore, since they belong to the state, then the state has the opportunity and the right to dictate where that child goes. Do they go to a homeschool, a Christian school, a public school? Do they go to a church daycare? Do they do a private daycare? And that parents are really basically incompetent to know how to gauge what is a safe environment. Again, that's contrary to everything since the founding of America, because the basis of society, as we know, is the family. And the family is given that responsibility, now the government, to make those decisions for their children. But Indiana, Mike, especially with your help for more than 25, 30 years now, joining with me down there to fight these battles, we've been able together with churches, pastors, individuals all over the state of Indiana, not to take a political position, but to take a biblical position that parents are responsible for raising their children in the nurture and admonition of the Lord. And we've been able to make Indiana, by the grace of God, one of the freest states for churches and their ministries, Christian schools and homeschools anywhere in the country. But as you and I both know, everything that we've won, Micah, for decades can be lost in one legislative session. And it isn't just Democrats. It's Democrats and Republicans that have opposed us over the years. So people need to, that's why they need to stay plugged into AFA. They need to be on your email list, because if they want to know what's going on in the 2024 General Assembly, they'll start filing bills, as you know, in November. And then they'll start file more bills in December. And with this being an election year, some people maybe will try to position themselves in favor with people that want more government control over families, churches, Christian schools, and homeschools. And the best source of information in the 2024 General Assembly is going to be your email. So I encourage everybody to get your email. And I also know that it takes money to run an organization. We've done that now for 43 years, November 22nd. And so I encourage people to give financially to AFA, because not only is it's a financial contribution, and yes, it's tax deductible, but they really need to look at a contribution to AFA as an investment.
Like insurance.
Exactly. It's an investment in the future for their family, their church, their Christian schools, because if we lose the freedom to homeschool, if we lose the freedom to have Christian schools operate freely without government control, now of course we believe in fire codes and sanitation, but not control over teachers, over the curriculum, or the manner in which they operate independently, or who they hire. That's none of the government's business. If we lose that, we may not get that freedom back in our lifetime. And so people need to be proactive. They need to get your email, and they need to do three things. One, when they get the email, they need to read it. They need to find out what the action plan is, because you're very good at that, of telling them, here's who to contact. You also give them a link to find out who their senator and who their representative are. And they also need to share that with other people. The other thing they need to do is they need to be praying about, okay, we're going to get Micah's information. We're going to share it with other people. We're going to contact our senator and our rep. But then they also need, in addition to praying for you, they need to put feet to their prayers, and they need to give something financially. Even if it's $10, $20, $30 a month, they need to do that. And they need to really, with social media now, they can share your information widely. It's a whole lot different, brother, than when you and I started, when we didn't have cell phones. We were stuffing envelopes even before fax machines. Now with social media, people can be empowered with knowledge from you on how they can really make a difference. And they also need to stay in touch with you in the election year, because you'll be linking voter guides to that. And so people need to look at an investment like an insurance policy with AFA, not just during the legislature, but the whole year round, because you operate all year, and they'll be getting voter guide information too.
I'm thinking about your history a little bit. There's so many things I could, well, let me ask you this first before I want to back up on a few issues. But as we're talking about this, tell people, how many phone calls does it take to move? You've seen instances where 5, 10, 15 phone calls in one day, not over a week, but in 1 hour, can really move a legislator. Is that still true?
It is still true. And with email, it's really good, because, again, people can get your email, for example. They can respond to that email in a matter of minutes. And what those legislators still do, they will look at the stack of emails and a stack of phone calls and see, wow, I've got 3 people that are opposed to this bill that will benefit families and churches, but I've got 25. I've got 20 over here. And especially since you do things in terms of a time-sensitive situation. So say you find out that a committee hearing is going to happen on Thursday morning, and you put out an alert on Tuesday afternoon. If before that committee hearing they have 15, 20 emails or phone calls, that has a huge impact on them, because they know for every email, for every phone call, there's other family members, there's neighbors, there's church members, there's all kinds of people that this person communicates with. And if they took the time to email and to make a phone call to me, and I don't do what they want them to do, then it's going to play out good for them maybe in the next election. And people need to remember too, Micah, that they'll even be more sensitive next year, because all 100 state reps are up for re-election, and half the state senators. So people really need, again, to get plugged into you now, so when these bills start being filed later on in November, that you'll be able to let them know ahead of time. So Micah, even before they come back to the State House the 1st of January, they can start getting emails and phone calls. But to go back to your question, yes, it is still true. 5, 10, 15, or 20 emails or phone calls makes a difference. And the reason for that, Micah, is if we were to go out today to a restaurant, you and I and Jeff, who's doing all the filming and all the technical work today, and we stopped the restaurant at noon and said, hey, I got a question for you. I got a $100 bill here from Jeff, and I'll give it to you if you can answer these 3 questions. First of all, does everybody here want their taxes to go up? No, they don't want that.
Right. Does
everybody here believe that unborn babies have a right to life? The vast majority would say yes. Does everybody here believe that churches ought to be free to have ministries to help families and children? They'd say yes. Christian schools be free? Yes. How many of you think that marriage still ought to be between a man and a woman? The vast majority of people at that restaurant would say, absolutely, we agree completely. Now, what are the 3 questions? And you would say, okay, I got Jeff's $100 bill here. I'll give it to you if you can tell me who your state rep is,
Yep.
your state senator, and your congressman. And unless it's you or Jeff or an ally of yours, they'll go back to eating and you'll leave with your $100 bill.
Right.
So it's not that people don't care, it's that they don't know.
Yeah.
And you give them not only the information, but how to get a hold of the person and how to find out who represents them. And that's why, because most people don't know who represents them, when they get 5, 10, or 15 phone calls or emails, huge avalanche, Micah.
Don't you think, too, something I've learned is I tell people, if you're contacting your legislator and you're a pastor, don't say this is Joe Smith. Say this is Pastor Joe Smith,
Right.
or I'm a deacon at my church,
Absolutely.
or I'm a doctor, or I'm a business, because that's a gatekeeper. People
Absolutely.
say, the legislator looks at that, okay, that's Joe Smith, but oh, that's Pastor Joe Smith. He's got 100 people in his church.
That's absolutely right.
And so because they're always thinking about what's going on back home, how many people are speaking for this one email.
No, you're absolutely correct. And Micah, that's right. And it doesn't, people need to remember, pastors especially, or some people in a church will say, well, our church can't do this. We can't make an announcement. You're not asking people to endorse a candidate.
Right.
You're not asking people to endorse a political party. That's not what Micah Clark's all about. Micah Clark is not locked into a party
Right.
or to any candidate. Micah Clark believes in policy issues that are biblically based. And that's why it's so important for people to back you up on what you're doing, because the legislators know when Micah Clark shows up at the State House, when they get a phone call from Micah Clark, that Micah Clark is not just speaking on behalf of himself and his wife and his family. You're speaking on behalf of hundreds of churches, thousands of families, and that's why you have clout down there, because number one, you're factual, you're accurate, you're consistent. You have not changed your biblical position because the Bible hasn't changed.
And I've learned that from you.
All these years. But you're right. And so a pastor needs to think, well, can I send an email? Can I make an announcement in my church? Absolutely. Because churches can make an announcement about a legislative issue and doesn't violate their tax-exempt status. And so they do need to say, okay, I'm Pastor so-and-so, I'm the pastor of this church, and they know, okay, that's in my district. They've got 150 people there on Sunday morning that are going to listen to them. It has a huge, huge impact when they get that, or doctor, like you say, or businessman, or any title that somebody can put there.
Well, as you look back, I know you're looking back on your 40-plus years. We talked about the early 80s, and I got involved in the 90s. From, say, the 85 to 90, was your big issue perhaps the abstinence law, or were there other battles? I know the abortion issue was starting to really crank up, and when I was an intern in 90, you had informed consent, you had sex selection abortions and other things that came up. Was there anything in that gap that really jumped out at you that were major issues?
There was, in addition to protecting the Christian schools and the churches, but the abstinence issue was a big issue, because then we passed legislation that said when a child is taught in the public schools, they are taught that abstinence is the best way to protect themselves, and that the standard we expect of them is to abstain from sexual activity until they get married, and then to be faithful to their husband or their wife. That was legislation that passed, that was adopted for all the public schools of the state of Indiana in that period, 85 to 95. There was another issue. It was an issue of the living will issue. Would living will bring about euthanasia?
That's right.
And so we were able to, when Bob Daley was Speaker of the House beginning from 1981 to 1986, that we were able to stop legislation that would have opened up the door maybe to euthanasia in the early 80s here in the state of Indiana. And because doctors contacted elected officials, just like what you said, a doctor has clout because they know they have patients, and churches and people contact them. So it was the abstinence law, it was protecting people from euthanasia, it was continuing to protect churches and Christian schools, and then right after that began the battle over protecting marriage between a man and a woman.
I was going to ask you about that. Do you think, so from when I got involved in 90, 91, 92 to today, Was the marriage issue or RFRA, were those probably the two biggest battles that you saw, or were there other major battles? I mean, I've seen you chewed out on the House floor, on the Senate floor by people because you wouldn't back down. And we had some intense battles over the years, but are those the two probably big ones that stand out, or was it maybe the special session on life last summer?
The special session on life was a huge victory for us, Mike, and thank you for all that you did in making that possible, because Indiana now has one of the strongest pro-life laws in the entire nation. But in 2015, with the RFRA battle that happened, that got national attention, and it never should have gotten national attention the way it did, because you and I stood toe-to-toe with the legislators down there to say, no, we need to protect religious freedom in the state of Indiana, and religious freedom is more important than somebody's personal choice. We're not talking about discrimination. We're talking about protecting religious freedom. Huge battle in the state of Indiana. And the other thing was over the homosexual marriage issue.
Yes.
For years and years and years, when the Democrats were in control down there, we couldn't get that passed to where it had to pass in two separately elected legislative sessions so it could be voted on by the people. But then when Republicans took over as well, then what they did, they amended it on the floor of the House of Representatives, so it changed, so we had to start all over again. And then unfortunately after that, the Supreme Court ruled against us. But we should have passed that early on in the early 2000s. So, but those battles continue today, because what was the homosexual marriage battle about? It was about the definition of family.
Right.
And it was about protecting children. And so then that moved forward to the religious liberty issue with RFRA. And so those same battles are being fought out in the Christian schools, the home schools, the churches. And so what people need to look at is, when you look at legislation now that Micah Clark and pornography that you've been heavily involved in helping stop that around the state of Indiana, is the impact on children. Because the opposition understands if they can capture the heart and mind of a child, they'll wind up scarring them for the rest of their life. And what you've been doing and joining with me down there is to fight to protect the innocence of children, protect parental rights down there. And those battles aren't going to go away. They're going to shift maybe, but it still comes down to religious freedom in the churches, the ministry of education of the children, whether it's a Christian school that's associated with the church or one that's not, the whole thing about vacation Bible schools, Sunday schools, and the teaching of children, homeschooling of children, and the right of families to function independently of government control. That's the big umbrella issue, that it changes with regard to the issue. But the big issue is, how do we protect the parents, the families, and the children, and the religious freedom here in the state of Indiana?
Well, it goes back to what we pointed out earlier. Too many legislators operate from the mindset that the family is broken.
Absolutely.
And that's how they govern, and they forget about the rights of functional families. And even single moms who do a very good job, they assume the government has to be involved in everything, and the government knows best.
Absolutely.
So as we wrap up, I know you're winding down Advance America after 41 years. I want to thank you for the work you've done there. I can't imagine Indiana without you. I know you're still going to be around. I know you're still involved. But to everything, there's a season, and running organizations a lot. Tell us about your family and your grandkids. You've got grandkids and kids now coming?
Yeah, 2 children who are married and 2 grandkids. And so I started working in downtown Indianapolis in 1974.
Wow.
So for almost 50 years, I've been traveling to downtown Indianapolis almost on a daily basis. And so as I prayed about it this year, because we're going to have our 43rd anniversary, November 22nd, what did the Lord want me to do with regard to Advance America? And the fact that you are operating a very strong, powerful organization because you have people behind you with their prayers, financial support, then that gave me a comfort level that there was going to be an entity that was going to still be around that I could still work with, as I have for all these years. But the Lord gave me an absolute peace, as He did in starting it in 1988, that now was the time to close it down. I'm still going to be practicing law, still going to be involved as a private citizen, still going to be working with pastors, Christian schools, and churches and others, and most importantly, with regard to the legislature, working with you down there, because the battles will still continue. But the Lord said, no, this is the time to wrap this up, work with Micah, and then continue to do things through the law office and as a private citizen. And so that's my plan going forward in 2024, is to continue to work and network with pastors, Christian schools, continue to talk with legislators, as you do. Legislators call you all the time for advice. They want to know what you think about a bill. Do you have advice about drafting a bill? So I'll continue to do that. But I appreciate the fact that you're not retiring,
Yeah,
that you're
I know.
still going to be around, and so that I'll have the opportunity to continue our friendship, our relationship, our working relationship, to continue to help Indiana be probably one of the top 2 or 3 freest states in the nation for pro-life, for Christian schools, for children in the public schools, and for families and churches. So thank you, Micah, for the chance to continue to work with you as we move forward, and for all the past victories that we've had and the battles together.
Well, it's a great reminder that you don't need an organization to testify down there.
No.
And you don't have to be a lobbyist like you and I are, or have experience. In fact, I think legislators sometimes get tired of hearing from you and me. When someone takes the time to drive and sit for 3 hours before they can testify for 2 minutes because they care so much about children or about family or about life, that really carries a lot of weight. And we can help people with that, with testifying, but a public committee is a public committee. Anybody can testify. And so you don't need an organization to testify. I don't need one, and our audience doesn't need one, but our organizations can help people in learning how to testify and who the players are and how to be effective.
Absolutely. And Micah, as we look at wrapping up this program today, I want to encourage people. This is coming up to the end of the year with one of the most important election years and legislative sessions in Indiana coming up in 2024. So as people listen today, they not only need to be grateful for Micah Clark, and they're appreciative of Micah Clark and AFA and all that you do, but they need to do something more than just be appreciative. They need to pray, and pray often for you, for the organization, and for the individuals down at the State House, all the people serving in office. But then they need to do more than that too. They need to sit down and write a check for the end of the year and say, we're in, we're part of this. And then they need to look at their budget and say, okay, I can give $10 a month. I can give $20 a month. Whatever they can give, because they need to look at that as, how can I help protect my children, my family, my church? They can't be at the State House all the time as you are. They can't review those hundreds of bills like you do. They can't talk with elected officials like you do. But what they can do is help you by taking that burden off your shoulders of having to raise money throughout the year to say, I'm in, Micah, put me down. You'll know that I'm praying for you, and I'm going to send a monthly contribution to AFA to help make it possible. And then when they get that alert, spend 2 or 3 minutes, send an email, make a phone call, and be part of the solution. It's a team effort, and they need to join with AFA.
Well, it's a great reminder, because so many of the groups you and I fought against down there are either funded by the government, or they have forced union dues or association dues, or they're connected to major entities. And very few groups that we run up against on the other side are actually donation run.
That's right.
And so that's why even the smallest gift is helpful to us, because we don't receive government funds. We're not connected to those types of groups. But a little can do a lot. It's a David and Goliath fight sometimes, but we've seen win after win after win.
That's right.
When average people get involved.
That's right. And people need to remember that contributions to AFA are not only tax deductible, but they're confidential.
Yes.
They're tax deductible and they're confidential. And Edmund Burke was right when he said, all that is necessary for evil to triumph is for good men to do nothing. The majority of Hoosiers think like you and I do. The majority of Hoosiers want to protect unborn children. They want to protect churches. They want to protect children. They want to protect parental rights. They want to protect Christian schools. They want to protect the right of parents to choose homeschooling, Christian school, or private school. So the majority of people are with us. They just need to remember that they have an organization, an AFA, that can help magnify their voice beyond anything that they've got. So they need to partner with you and commit to standing with you, because this battle is not going to go away until the Lord comes back.
Well, you've been very kind, but it would be amiss for me if I didn't mention you are a historic leader in Indiana. The victories you've had are second to none. Advancing America is one of the best organizations ever. And, as a homeschool dad myself, I can't imagine where we'd be without the work you did in the 80s for us to homeschool in the 2000s as a family. So thank you for all you've done. Thank you for service. I look forward to seeing you at the State House again. You testify so well. I mean, you've taken so many arrows and you don't flinch. And they know that. And some of them really don't like it because you're unflappable. But I appreciate all you've done over the years, standing for truth and righteousness, faith, family, and values over the years. So thank you for joining us today.
Thank you. Thank you for having me on the program.
Well, thank you for watching. I hope you'll share this with your friends. I hope you'll watch this and tell others about it. But I hope you have a great weekend as well. And thank you for joining us. Micah Clark, American Family Association. Have a great weekend.